I want to tell you a story. A story about two brothers who were born into a kind of wealth most people can't even imagine. Not rich like, nice house and a couple of cars. Rich. No, these two were born into oil money rich, the type of fortune that seemed bottomless, the type of money that bends the world around you. Nelson Bunker Hunt and William Herbert Hunt grew up believing that limits were things that applied to other people. And one day, with all the confidence that comes from being heirs to an empire, they decided they were going to outsmart the financial world and make more money than anyone had ever made before. Their brilliant idea: bet everything, literally everything, on silver. Now, most people, if they want to invest in silver, they buy a coin or two, maybe a few bars if they're feeling bold. But the Hunt brothers didn't think like normal investors, because they weren't normal investors. They were tycoons. They were heirs to an empire. So instead of buying a few coins, they aimed for something insane. They wanted to own silver on a scale the world had never seen. And piece by piece, contract by contract, bar by bar, they ended up owning nearly 1/3 of all the silver on the planet. Their confidence was so great that when they needed to move this mountain of silver, they didn't hire a truck, they didn't book cargo space, they chartered Boeing 707s. Multiple jets. And they loaded these aircraft with tons of silver and flew it to their vaults in Switzerland like it was the crown jewel of a kingdom they were about to create. And that wasn't enough. When the cash started to run thin, they borrowed more. Banks were practically throwing money at them, believing the Hunts could do no wrong. The brothers thought they had cracked the code to infinite wealth. They truly believed they were on the verge of becoming the richest humans in history. But as stories like this often go, the higher you climb, the farther you fall. And instead of becoming the silver kings of the world, they became the faces of one of the most spectacular financial disasters in American history. Billions lost in a single day. Personal bankruptcy. The government stepping in to stop the bleeding. And yet somehow, despite all of that, despite being financially crushed, humiliated, and dragged through one of the largest market collapses of the century, the Hunt family today is still worth over $20 billion. But to understand how this happened, we have to go back to the beginning. Because the story of the Hunt brothers isn't just a story about silver, it's a story about ambition, greed, and the belief that money can make you untouchable. It begins in the 1970s, a decade that shook the global economy. In 1971, President Richard Nixon went on national television and made a momentous announcement. The United States would no longer back the dollar with gold. It was called the closing of the gold window. Nixon promised that this move would strengthen the American economy, that it would restore confidence, that it would prove America's best days were ahead. But those promises didn't exactly pan out the way he hoped. What followed instead were oil shocks, inflation, recession fears, and a lingering sense of financial uncertainty that hung over the country like a storm cloud. Investors didn't know where to put their money. The stock market was shaky, the dollar seemed unstable, and people wanted something real, something solid. Some turned to gold, of course. But the Hunt brothers, they saw something else. They saw silver. Nelson Bunker Hunt became obsessed with the idea that the US dollar would collapse under the weight of inflation. He believed that real wealth wasn't in paper, it was in precious metals. And in his mind, silver was the perfect hedge against a world sliding into chaos. He convinced his brother Herbert, and together they began pouring their fortune into silver. They didn't just want to profit from it, they wanted to control it. By 1973, the brothers were already buying massive amounts, and by 1974, after their billionaire father H.L. Hunt passed away, they suddenly had even more capital than before. Their father had been one of the richest men in American history, richer than many kings, richer than many dictators, richer than almost anyone alive. And now his sons were eager to carve out their own legacy. Silver was trading at around $2 an ounce at the time. $2. Nelson believed it could rise tenfold, maybe more. He saw inflation coming like a tidal wave and believed silver would be the only safe haven. So the brothers went all in. They bought physical silver, storing it everywhere they could. They bought silver futures contracts, agreements to buy silver at set prices in the future. And unlike normal traders, who usually settle these contracts in cash, the Hunt brothers demanded physical delivery. They wanted actual bars, actual metal, literal tons of silver. This was extremely unusual. Few investors ever saw the metal they traded. But the Hunts wanted the real stuff, stacked high, locked up, and under their control. And when their storage started to overflow, they looked overseas. That's when those famous Boeing 707 flights began. Massive jets loaded with silver flying across the Atlantic to Switzerland. It was a spectacle, an operation fit for royal treasure. With every ounce they purchased, the price of silver climbed. Other investors saw the rise and panicked. People tore through their homes looking for old cutlery, heirlooms, jewelry, anything they could sell. Pawn shops filled with lines that stretched out the door. Thieves even started breaking into homes specifically targeting silver. The mania was spreading. Meanwhile, the Hunt brothers were ecstatic. Their plan was working. Their silver was skyrocketing in value, up 100%, 200%, eventually over 700%. By early 1980, they owned or controlled over 100 million ounces of silver, a third of the world's supply. At one point, their position was worth an estimated $4.5 billion, which in today's money would be tens of billions. But as the price climbed, so did the pressure. The brothers' strategy was triggering a full-blown short squeeze. Investors who had bet that silver prices would fall were now being crushed as the price rose higher and higher. They scrambled to buy silver and close their positions, only pushing prices up even further. The market bent, then cracked. And regulators were watching closely. The U.S. government tolerated the Hunts' activities for a while. But when wealthy investors from Saudi Arabia began partnering with the brothers, pouring in capital, and helping them acquire even more silver, the government started to panic. Silver wasn't some random commodity. It was essential in electronics, photography, medicine, and even defense. The idea that two Americans and several foreign investors could control a third of the world's silver supply, that was a national security issue. So, behind the scenes, pressure began to build. Regulators wanted to slow the Hunts down, and the commodity exchanges listened. Then came January 7, 1980. The COMEX, the major commodities exchange, implemented a new rule, quietly but effectively. It was called Silver Rule No. 7. And this rule was devastating to the Hunt brothers' entire strategy. Silver Rule No. 7 limited how much silver could be purchased using borrowed money. Traders could still sell, but they could barely buy. The Hunt brothers relied heavily on leverage, borrowing, to keep buying silver. Suddenly, that door slammed shut. And then, the Federal Reserve stepped in. The Fed sent quiet but powerful warnings to every major bank in the country. Stop lending money for speculative activity. They didn't name the Hunts directly, but everyone knew who the message was for. Almost overnight, banks cut off the brothers' credit. The Hunts had billions of dollars in silver contracts. They had warehouses full of silver. But now, they had no cash. No liquidity. They were stuck defending a position that was sinking beneath them like a stone. Then came March 27, 1980. A day that would go down in financial history. It was called Silver Thursday. On that morning, the silver market collapsed. Prices plunged more than 50% in a single day. Margin calls started pouring in, demands for the Hunts to put up more money to cover their losses. But they didn't have it. They couldn't pay. And when the Hunts failed to meet a single crucial margin call, everything unraveled. Wall Street went into panic mode. Banks, brokers, investment firms, all scrambled to contain the damage. Some firms faced total collapse. Several were forced into emergency mergers. The ripple effects hit the entire financial system. The Hunt brothers, once seen as unstoppable giants, were suddenly symbols of recklessness and chaos. And their nightmare was only beginning. As silver plunged, their oil holdings, the foundation of their wealth, were also suffering. Global oil prices fell, cutting deeply into their net worth. By 1986, the Hunt brothers' main business empire filed for bankruptcy. 2 years later, the brothers themselves declared personal bankruptcy. And then came the lawsuits. A Peruvian state-owned mineral company sued the brothers, claiming the silver crash had hurt their finances. A New York jury agreed and ordered the Hunts to pay $130 million in damages. The Commodity Futures Trading Commission fined them $10 million each and permanently banned them from trading commodities in the United States. Imagine that. Once two of the richest men on earth, now banned from the markets they tried to control. But here's where the story takes another surprising turn. Even after bankruptcy, even after fines, even after losing almost everything, the Hunt brothers weren't completely abandoned. Creditors and powerful allies still believed the Hunts could rebound. They had too many connections, too many assets, too much influence to be written off completely. So a consortium of banks and corporations stepped in, arranging a massive $1.1 billion credit line to help the brothers stabilize their remaining assets. It took them almost a decade to unwind the mess. Their silver holdings were slowly dismantled. Their debts were repaid bit by bit. Their influence in finance was shattered forever. But the Hunt family still owned massive amounts of land. They still had stakes in oil. They still had business opportunities and relationships that survived the storm. And slowly, patiently, the dynasty rebuilt itself. By the 2000s, with oil prices rising again, their wealth quietly returned. By the 2010s, the Hunt family's net worth had climbed back into the billions. And today, the family is once again among the wealthiest in America, with an estimated fortune of around $20 billion. The story of the Hunt brothers is more than just a wild financial drama. It's a cautionary tale about speculation, leverage, and the dangerous belief that wealth makes you invincible. It shows that even the richest people cannot bend the market to their will forever. Governments can change the rules. Exchanges can shift the landscape. And when the tide turns, even billionaires can drown. Over the years, many have tried to replicate what the Hunts did. During the 2021 GameStop saga, retail traders briefly turned their attention to silver, hoping for another short squeeze. Some claimed silver could shoot to $100, even $1,000 an ounce. But it didn't. The price barely pushed above $30 before falling again. Markets today have safeguards, stricter regulations, position limits, and far more oversight. And yet, whispers of a silver squeeze 2.0 circulate every now and then. Retail traders claim they can push prices up again. But the truth is, without someone like the Hunts, someone with billions of dollars and the audacity to try to control a global commodity, the odds are slim. Today, institutions and industries have far more power than any group of retail investors. Still, you never know. The Hunt brothers didn't think they were making history. They thought they were making money. Instead, they created one of the greatest cautionary tales in financial history. So now I'm curious, what do you think? Should the government have intervened when it did? Or should the Hunts have been allowed to ride their gamble all the way to the end? If you've watched this far, drop a $sign emoji in the comments so I know you made it to the end. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.